Hello friends, and welcome to our shared spiritual practice for Advent. Our purpose in the series is to dive more deeply into the mystery of Incarnation, not just as a concept or a theological idea, but as a way to expand our awareness and experience a deeper connection with God, with ourselves, with others, and of course with our world. So let's begin. I invite you to take a few moments to center yourself. Focus on your breathing and on making it deeper and slower. Feel the air filling your lungs and bringing life into your body, and feel the cleansing as you exhale. Ground yourself in your space and on the earth, and prepare your mind and your heart and your body and your spirit for your practice. Remember that you can pause the video at any time if you need to stay with any element of your practice or reflection. And when you're ready, light the Advent candle for today. And sit in stillness and silence for a moment. You may want to gaze into the flame or close your eyes, whatever is most meaningful for you. And now become aware of what's happening inside you. What thoughts are dominating your thinking? What emotions are you processing? What feelings in your body are significant for you in this moment? And what tasks that you need to do are pressing in on you? Take some time to write these things down in your journal. And when you're done, lay the journal and everything in it aside for the moment. We'll return to it later in our practice. I'll give you some time to do all this. There's an old story of a mother who had two boys, aged about 7 and 9. They were a real handful, full of energy, very curious, and somehow always ending up in lots of trouble. The mother was getting to the end of her tether, and so she decided to ask her priest for advice. After listening to her story, the priest recommended that she bring the boys to his office so that he could talk to them. Well, the day came, she got them smartly dressed and took them off to the church. The brothers waited in fear until the priest finally called the older boy into his office. Once he was seated, the priest looked at the boy intently and asked, "Where is God?" The boy looked at him with big eyes, but he was unable to speak because of his fear. So the priest tried again, this time a little louder. "Where is God?" Well, this was too much for the poor boy. He shot off his chair and out of the office. He grabbed his little brother by the hand and started running as fast as he could. And when they had managed to get a few blocks away from the church, they stopped, both of them panting and shaking. And finally, the younger boy found the words to ask what had happened. And shaking and crying, his older brother blurted out, "They've lost God, and they're trying to pin it on us." Now, how would you have answered the priest's question? Where is God for you? And what form does God take, if any? Years ago, Bette Midler and later Cliff Richard sang a moving song about our unity and connectedness with one another and with the earth. The chorus was a little unfortunate, but it seems to express what many people's instinctive response would be. It says this: God is watching us from a distance. Even in a lot of Christian thinking, there is this idea that God lives up there in heaven and dips into our world from time to time to fix things or to punish evildoers with a plague or a natural disaster. We may speak about God being omnipresent, But it's common to hear believers speak of certain places as God-forsaken, to say that God has left somewhere, or that the Spirit isn't here. It's also very common to think of God as spirit, meaning non-material, separate from the physical world and disembodied. But what do we do with this kind of thinking when we celebrate a season like Advent? Yes, we talk about Jesus as God in human flesh. We throw around the word incarnation. But in my experience, many of us tend to think of the incarnation of Christ as an anomaly, a once-off, never-to-be-repeated event in human history. Sometimes we may extend our thinking to include something like the Hindu concept of the avatar, where we believe that God is manifest in different ways through the ages. In this thinking, Jesus may or may not be the primary avatar, but he certainly isn't the only one. But even there's still the sense that an incarnate God is an exception. It's not in God's nature to be embodied. But what if it is? What if God is, in an essential way, in God's very nature, a unity of matter and spirit? What if God always was, always is, and always will be eternally embodied? What if the Bible has always tried to show us an embodied God, but we've often missed it? Here are a few examples of what I mean. In Psalm 139, verse 7 to 12, it speaks about there being no place where we can go where God is not. I can never escape from your spirit, it says. I can never get away from your presence. If I go up to heaven, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. If I ride on the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there your hand will guide me, and your strength will support me. I could ask the darkness to hide me, and the light around me to become night. But even in darkness, I cannot hide from you. To you, the night shines as bright as day. Darkness and light are the same to you. In Revelation 13, verse 8, the writer refers to Christ as the Lamb who was slaughtered before the world was made, indicating that incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection are not things that have only existed in the last 2,000 years. They are things that are somehow built into the divine nature and into the universe that God created. And then a little later, at the end of the book of Revelation, chapter 21, verses 1 to 3, the writer speaks of a new heaven and a new earth, basically saying that heaven and earth become one. This would seem to indicate that the nature of the universe is a unity of matter and spirit that reflects the God who lives among God's people, to use the language of Revelation. And when we add into these scriptures our understanding of the nature of the universe, it begins to become clear that the unity of matter and spirit is part of the divine reality. The physical world and the spiritual world are different, but inseparably one. Reality is embodied and it is spiritual. And so is God, embodied and spiritual. Okay, that's great, but what does that mean for us? Well, here are my thoughts. First of all, it means that God is not far off. God is not watching us from a distance. Rather, God is near us, around us, among us, and within us. God is transcendent and yet simultaneously immanent. God is an unavoidable element of our lived experience, whether we're aware of God's presence or not. Advent is not so much about God coming to us as it is about us becoming increasingly aware of and engaged with God's omnipresent, embodied being in our world, in our lives, in our relationships, and even in our own being. Secondly, if God is embodied, then all matter is sacred. The physical world is not just waiting to be destroyed. Our human flesh is not a temporary tent that we live in for a few decades and then discard. Our humanness is not unspiritual, and our bodies are not anti-spirit. Rather, we are ourselves, as beings created in the divine image and likeness, embodied spirits. A complete, inseparable unity of spirit and matter. And so as we enter the Advent season, I invite you to open your awareness to perceive and experience the divine presence in our world, in your life, and in your own body. I invite you to dive into the experience of everything as sacred. Look for the sacredness in all things and allow your awareness of the sacred and your experience of the sacred to move you to awe and wonder and a deeper connection with the divine life that permeates it all. Where is God? God is here. God is there. God is everywhere and in everything, and God is even in you. Let's sit with these thoughts for a moment. What has caught your attention today? What do you feel drawn to think about more? What do you feel excited about? What brings you discomfort? What resonates with you, and what do you have questions about? You may want to make a note of these things so that you can carry them with you into the week. And now I invite you to go back to your journal. And on a fresh page, draw a circle for each of the thoughts, emotions, feelings, and tasks that you identified at the start of today's practice. You may want to make different sized circles depending on the perception of the size or the importance of each of those things. You can also make them closer to one another or further away from each other depending on how they relate to each other. Once you've done that, think about the ideas from today's reflection that most spoke to you. And now add a circle into your diagram for each idea or concept or metaphor or suggestion that resonated with you today. Again, you can use different sizes and distances to depict how these things relate to you and to one another. And then when you've done that, and where it feels appropriate in your diagram, draw lines to connect what you learned today with the thoughts, emotions, feelings, and tasks that you identified at the start of our practice. See how today's reflection speaks into these areas of your life and make a note of any significant insights that may arise. You may want to live with this diagram through the week and return to it or adapt it as your experiences change. And now as we bring today's practice to a close, I invite you to write 2 things in your journal that you will carry with you into your life and relationships in the coming week. Firstly, what one truth do you want to remember and draw on through the week? And then secondly, what one thing do you want to do to live from this truth in the week ahead? Remember to go back and remind yourself of these 2 things and of the other insights you've received from today's practice throughout the week. And so now, as we return to our daily routines, may we go in a deeper awareness of Incarnation, and may we remain open to experience Incarnation more deeply each day.